Hello, Spark fans, and welcome back to Advancing Spark. So, we're doing another Databricks Runtime review today. So, Databricks Runtime 7.6 has been out long enough for several people to ping me and go, why have you not done a review yet? So, apologies. But what I thought is, with some of the previous runtimes, I've been so quick off the mark going, there's a new release, let's talk about it, that there's been new features enter the beta after I've started talking about it. So, I thought I'll give it a week or two after each release comes out before I'll talk about it. So, Databricks Runtime 7.6 has now been out for a couple of weeks. So long, in fact, that Runtime 8 is now here. So we have a new major version of the Databricks Runtime, and that heralds a load of changes, usually breaking changes. So we saw that going from 5 to 6, we saw that going from 6 to 7. It's when there's a major step in the version of Spark, the version of Scala and Python, when we might see some backwards compatibility problems. So we've got those two things to talk about today. What's in 7.6? What new features can we see that you could probably just upgrade straight to and see how that works? And then what's going to be in Runtime 8 and how do you get yourself ready for it? As always, do not forget to like and subscribe and let us know down in the comments if there's any bits of this runtime, either of them, that you are particularly excited about and what you want to use it for. Otherwise, let's go and have a look. So as usual, we have our runtime release note. We can go see what's going on in this new runtime. So we've got Databricks Runtime 7.6, and we can see what's in there. So right off the bat, we have this thing. So I've been doing a few videos on Autoloader. You know I've been using Autoloader a lot, and this is one of my major frustrations. So when you're using Autoloader, you need to give it the cloud files configuration. You pop in a load of details saying, this is the blob store, this is the queue, this is all my service principal details, so I can create an event grid. You give it lots of info. One of those things you have to give it is a schema. Now, it kind of makes sense if you're reading from a CSV or something that is unstructured that needs to have structure applied to it. But reading from JSON, reading from Parquet, reading from other data sets, why do I have to give it a schema? So in this case, they've made JSON slightly better. It can now handle unparsed data and it can kind of just manage that as it pulls in, which is great. So you can kind of just do a, hey, look, if there's things that don't fit into my schema, just bung them in this one unparsed data column and just be like, there is your nice structure and everything else. And that's fantastic. That means we can be a lot more flexible in terms of how Autoloader is working and kind of the data that we're bringing in. However, I was hoping for more. I still have to give it a schema for Parquet. I still have to give it a fixed schema for CSV. And Autoloader, if you've been playing around with it and you haven't seen this, if the schema is wrong, you get an error. So your ability to do like row rejection and very flexible schema drift aware style loading via Autoloader is very rigid. Adding in Autoloader adds a huge amount of rigidity to what you're expecting data to look like, unless you do a load of workarounds like pre-inferring schema and passing that in, and then why? So this is a great move. It's a great sign that we're going in the right direction with Autoloader, but it's still not there yet. But I'm looking forward to having a play around and having that kind of just giant unparsed data column of doom of everything else. Kind of almost tempted just to have that as my only column and then work it out later once I've landed it and once it's in my domain where I can play with it. But anyway, enough of that. Okay, support for reading overwritten files. Again, another Autoloader problem in the past has been it's aware of new files. And then if you go, oh, that file is wrong, and you overwrite it in the blob store with a new version of that file, Autoloader goes, no, that's a file overwrite. That's not a new file. And you don't get that flowing through your system. So now we've got the ability to say, yeah, if someone changes the file, please trigger that and bring it through again, and then we can deal with it. So good, useful feature. Okay, other bits. I am not going to go into the maths here, but ZOrder, in terms of how ZOrder decides how it lays out the file pattern of min-max files across however many files that you have, is already been backed by the ZOrdering mathematical algorithms, and they've said, you know what, there's a better way of doing it if you've got lots and lots of values. So now when you ZOrder your files, you've got this Hilbert space-filling curve, which is just a different value layout algorithm for applying this kind of thing into files. So if you have ZOrder not over just one column, but you're ZOrdering by multiple different columns, there's a new algorithm applied, the Hilbert space filling curve, just to work out the best, the most optimal way of actually filling the data. That is about as much as I know of it. I've not gone into the details yet. Essentially, I'm taking it at face value of Z order's gotten a bit more better and a bit more efficient when you've got more columns. Not pretending to know any more than that. Okay, merge operations. Again, just some more improvements. And we've been seeing that a lot over the past few runtimes. Just some things going, allow more merged, allow more match statements. Optimize those match statements. Allow match statements when we're not doing an insert. So just kind of generally making the whole merge approach more and more robust and more optimized. And that's been a big thing. We're using merge a hell of a lot more than we used to. Because merge used to be useful, but you could only write it in SQL, so you had to hack around a lot of dynamic text to turn it into SQL. And then it had the API, but the API was quite limited, and we could write a Python merge statement, but we'd have to like hack bits into it. And it would only support several, one clause of each time. And they've got multiple ones, and they've got optimized ones, and it's just this slowly growing feature that honestly we're merging in most stages of the lake these days, which is great. It means we have a standard pattern. Okay, just merge in it. Oh yeah, good. Partition filtering, merge in, and then manage its own stuff. So generally good to see there's still this focus on having that as the de facto pattern for inserting data when it's not a pure append. Another one when we're talking about merge is auto-tuning file sizes. Essentially, if you're doing a merge and you've got kind of bin compaction on, and it's turning in, so basically at the end of your insert, it has some fairly chunky files. If you're merging into that constantly, that can be fairly inefficient. So there's a preview feature. Okay, you do need to ask Databricks to turn it on currently. And what this will do is it'll go, actually, no, this is merge heavy. I'm going to use a slightly different file layout. Weirdly, I'm not going to go for the optimal big chunky 1 gig files. I'm going to actually go for a slightly different smaller files layout because then it's more efficient to pick up and merge into individual small files. So not how to play with that yet. Kind of curious to see how that performs and if that impacts the right performance on the other side, right? Because it might make ETL faster, but is it going to make my reading slower? We'll see. Multi-cluster writes in Spark. Don't really care, but fine. So essentially, you can now have multiple clusters and actually sort of guarantee some transactional consistency, which is great. But again, I don't know anyone doing that currently. And then there's some library upgrades, and there's the usual big slew of fixed bugs. So a few features in 7.6, not as much as I was expecting to see, honestly. Kind of why I was holding off a little bit before I actually did this review, just to see, are they going to sneak anything else in? But we'll see what happens when it actually goes into production. Main thing is Autoloader's a little bit more flexible, a little bit more efficient. Merge is a little bit more efficient. Z ordering is better if you've got more columns now. So generally, nice features, some nice things in 7.6. Nothing mind-blowing, honestly. And that might be because behind the scenes, while they were releasing 7.6, they came and went out with Runtime 8.0. So, as I said at the start, we have a major version shift coming up in Databricks now. And we saw that with the others on it. And I'm imagining this is going to be in preview for a little while. And this is actually bringing up breaking changes generally. It's the big shift, right? So going from 7.4 to 7.5 to 7.6 shouldn't break existing code. You might get one or two things with specialist features like Autoloader, but you're not going to have all of your Spark packages suddenly go, oh, no, that doesn't work. Switching a major version does have that chance. So this has got lots of things where you might have to migrate your code and check your code out. So what actually is it? What's changed? Well, I mean, straight off the bat, we've got that. Powered by Apache Spark 3.1. Now, that's a big shift. So we had 3.0, we had 3.0.1. Now this is a next version shift in terms of Spark. So there's a load of extra features, there's a load of new functions, there's a load of extra stuff. Essentially, the Spark engine's being updated. So unlike a lot of the Databricks runtime changes, where it's Databricks themselves have put in some new features, this is a major release of, well, not a major release, a minor version release of the Spark engine itself. So I've got a few things. Number one, Delta's now the default format. So if you say just create table, write table, and you don't give it a format, anytime where you are writing data somewhere and you don't bother to tell it what format it should use, it's going to pick Delta, which is, I mean, if you're doing that, you're doing it wrong. You should always specify the format. Certainly, if you're doing anything that's metadata driven, if you've built a framework or an engine to do a lot of this stuff, you should always be specifying the format. But if for some reason you don't, that's going to shift with this version. If you've got a load of users who are creating tables in the background as temporary scratchpad tables so they can do other stuff, and they don't even think about how they're creating those tables, they are going to be Delta tables. And there is some implications to that. So there's a whole migration guide that the guys have put out, which is essentially the things to look for, which actually how to go and review your code to make sure it is ready for everything being deltaed by default. So number one, big thing, Delta's now the default format. For me, it's not going to make any change to my code whatsoever because everything specifies the file format, which, is just sensible. But it does show this all-in commitment. Everything, regardless, everything is now Delta. And that's just a sign of how focused Databricks are on Delta being the de facto. If you've got data in a lake, it's held as a data table, full stop. Which, generally, as long as you've applied some structure, then it is great. Okay, structure streaming default trigger reduces. Now, Spark streaming is a bit of a weird one. When using structured streaming, it's really easy to think of it as it's streaming. It's just constantly, every record that comes in causes a little bit of compute, and that is not actually how Spark streaming works. Structured streaming is a micro batch processor. So essentially, it'll take a big clump of records, process them, finish, and then kick off another batch. Now, the default interval is at 0 milliseconds, meaning the moment it finishes a batch, it starts the next batch. So it will process as fast as it physically can. If it takes 1 millisecond to do a batch, then you're processing every millisecond. If it takes 500, you're processing every half a second, whatever it happens to be. So this change is saying, let's not make it 0, because lots of people were finding there's no records coming in, but it's constantly hammering the streaming queue saying, is there anything happening? So this just changed the default. Now, again, it's kind of just fixing laziness. If you are doing live streaming, you probably should set your processing time anyway, just so you have that configuration in there. But again, if you weren't currently setting anything, it's changing the default up, making it a little slower, a little bit more relaxed. So even if it finishes the micro batch really quick, it'll wait that minimum time of 500 milliseconds before it kicks things off. Okay, other bits. Library upgrades. Just some casual library upgrades where we're breaking the versions of Java and Scala. Good. So these major language changes. So the Java Scala is going up to 2.12. Again, it's not going to have that much of an impact. The change of Python to 3.8.6 may well have some bigger impacts. So if you're using a lot of Python libraries currently, certainly if you're using libraries that aren't part of the standard set that are installed by Databricks on default, you might want to check that compatibility. It's annoyed me for a long time that the Databricks CLI hasn't been Python 3.8.6 compatible. So you've had to use a 3.7 in order to use the Databricks CLI, and it looks like they've now fixed that and changed that. So be a little bit aware if you're using lots of other libraries and you're bringing lots of things in yourself, they need to be Python 3.8.6 compatible. R has got 4.0.3. Again, it's the go and check all the libraries that you're bringing in if you're going to switch up and start using Runtime 8. Now, if you're using a lot of out-of-the-box default Spark functionality, you might not be impacted at all. Might be absolutely fine. But be aware, that's the point of having this as a major release version, not a minor. There are lots and lots of library upgrades that they've probably been holding off on doing for a little while, rather than making a breaking change mid-release cycle. Okay, other bits and pieces. So they're just the core Spark engine enhancements made in 3.1. Lots of SQL bits, lots of SQL compatibility things. Support columnist and insert statement. Hooray! Some standard ANSI SQL things coming in. You can do char and varchar. Essentially just, again, moving that slightly more towards the full ANSI compatibility. So lots of good things in there from a SQL point of view. Performance enhancements, lots of invisible performance enhancements, which is great. So lots of reducing the amount of shuffles that happen just when you're running queries. Lots of essentially reusing elements of a shuffle to actually make that more efficient. Lots of doing things to do with pushing down more predicates. So actually, when we're reading from a source system, read less data if we can, filter the data before we read it onto the Spark engine. And there's lots of things like that built in here. So again, as usual, whenever we see a Spark upgrade version, there's usually a whole load of performance things in there. So there's lots of things that are in there. I advise you to take a look and have a bit of a run through these various changes. But yeah, it's good. Lots of nice things. What else we got? Things like partitioning, and so the APIs have gotten better. I think it's a little bit further down, but when we're using things like JDBC, we can now list all my tables, list all my databases when we're running a JDBC connector. So that kind of, our data sources are becoming more descriptive and allowing us to pass metadata statements to them. In terms of the different connectors. So again, partition pruning. So more starts with, ends with filters when we're doing file sources, which is just, again, great. Parquet, some more data type mappings, which is nice. Or never really use it these days, but again, nested column predicate pushdowns is super valuable. If you're trying to filter on something that's inside a nested column, that's just going to make things more efficient. And we can do the same things inside a JSON data source. So doing predicate pushdown on JSON, it's awesome. That's just going to help us do a load of filtering to try and manage that data a little bit, which is great. CSV, we've got the SQL text data source. So again, it's just improving the CSV schema inference. It's allowing us to understand the data types better, make that more accurate when we're doing it. Yeah, just generally some interesting stuff. So some good things coming through. There's some general cluster management level things. Again, deciding what happens on a decommission, what happens if a node goes down, improving resilience of some of those bits. A whole lot of new functions. And again, I'm not going to read out every function, go through and have a look at all the different things in here. One of the ones I'm quite excited about is the regex extract all. So if you've been playing around with a regex extract and you're identifying groups and you want to actually just give me back all of those groups so that I can actually then use like all the things between these two values, just bring out the whole thing. Just a slightly more functionality in terms of what we can do with regex when we're evaluating text columns. And there's a few things like that. So nth value raiser. There's lots of, again, new functions, new functionality. It'll be interesting to run through and have a bit of a play with that. Even just current catalog, even though what database am I inside, is actually quite a nice little useful one that we couldn't really do before. So again, loads of really, really useful things all going in there. Have a look through. Other bits, Project Zen. So Project Zen is the ongoing effort from Databricks to improve the Pythonic experience. So to reduce the whole pile of Java messages that you get when it errors and just give you the bit that's relevant in Python. That kind of stuff is all around Project Zen. Essentially, get rid of the noise and give us inner peace and harmony if we are a Python developer railing against the horrors of Java. Sorry. So lots of things like that, improvements to the documentation style, and just more and more options and things for Python users, which is great for me to see. Love it. A lot of PySpark improvements. Again, more functions. Look through that list of stuff. It's going to take a while, and we are quite high in that list. Structure streaming. Again, slightly more improvements in structure streaming. Not only do we have the kind of the speed of the micro batch, but generally how it works with the list of files it's working through, how it's going through, since you're kind of looking at its log, all the kind of just niceties of just that thing that you can leave it running and just make sure it is improved. And then a load of other stuff. There's a load of ML lib stuff. We're not going to go into the data sciencey bits, a load of R stuff, and then your list of libraries. And again, expect that list of libraries to be quite different because of that switch up to the newer Scala versions, the newer Java version, newer Python and R versions. Anything that was reliant on a higher version that's been held back for 6 months, a year, we've now got that shift up so we can actually now start using them. Cool. Oh, that's a big list of stuff, isn't it? So yeah, Runtime 8 is now available for you to go and have a play with. It is not yet production grade. It is still in beta, as is 7.6. But probably actually worth starting to think ahead and start getting your code ready for that shift. Certainly start having a look if you are using a lot of other libraries from PyPy or Maven, that kind of thing, and you're pulling them down into your Databricks clusters. Be a little bit careful, make sure they are still compatible with those library language version upgrades. But otherwise, just have a bit of a play. Look through that giant list of bug fixes and improvements and new kind of commands that we can use. And let us know, which ones are you excited about and which ones are you actually going, ooh, why would they put that in? There's no reason for that whatsoever. Yeah, as always, super interested to hear what you guys think about it. And super interested to think, like, when are you guys going to move on to that? It's really interesting because with Runtime 7, we had Spark 3. It's like, yeah, no, Spark 3, absolutely. We want AQE, we want dynamic partition pruning. We need all of those features. Is there any killer feature in here where you're like, we've got to move up to 8? That's what's going to unlock for us. So definitely interesting to hear what you guys think about it and how soon you are going to adopt it when this goes full GA. Please don't adopt it before it goes GA. It's not production ready, but you can start getting ready. Start getting your code ready. Start specifying the format of your tables if you don't do that already. But otherwise, let us know what you think. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.